love that. And I think that's one of the things when it comes to documentary filmmaking is like you have to be very strategic, right? With how you capture, where you are, being ready for those moments. I think one of my favorite parts in watching, through, and it kind of echoes some of that newness, when players are coming in, riding in on the scooters, before a practice. And I love the juxtaposition that you guys had between moments of like playfulness and newness, right? Like a player doing the gritty, and then, engaging the fans, but then also bringing in those kind of tougher moments and, when maybe a fight and things get, chippy on the field. I loved the way you kind of balanced that throughout this episode in particular. So it's amazing, and appreciate going through these screen grabs, because in a way it's like we're watching a storyboard through the lens that each of you captured. And I think that is something that I'm always curious about. Now that we've kind of gone through the overall structure, I want to take a step back, and we've had some questions in the chat already, like how many people does it take to execute this? So we'll get to that in a second, but how do you put yourselves in a position to best capture all of this?
I would say a lot of it is obviously pre-production and like meeting, and a great thing that Nate does every week before a game is like just a spreadsheet of like, here's everything that's happening, here's who's responsible for it. I told him just the other day, I'm like, that's like my favorite document that I reference, for the entire season. I'll always pull it up on my phone, whatever it is, and just make sure we're all good. Times listed on that, like it's very thorough. So I very much appreciate that. But then also on the flip side is just like prepare for everything to go wrong and just be nimble and just kind of use your instincts to like, okay, well, if I can't do this, what can I do instead? Or, what's a better use of my time, or whatever it is. So I would say, yeah, just being available and nimble and ready to like help in any way that you can. And the pre-production aspect, which we really focused on this past season, was extremely helpful.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would add,
this. Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I would just add having a pulse on your team, and kind of, we're lucky to have been here for a while, so we've seen the players come in and like know what their personalities are. But when you're doing this, you need to know like who will give you a soundbite, who won't, who will be friendly to a camera in their face, who won't. And that's where kind of like just the intuition comes into play. And, if it's a tense moment, who is going to give me the best chance? Because it's just a shot in the dark of if you're going to get something or not, because it's so unscripted in sports.
Yeah, I love hearing the feedback on an organizational standpoint, because I think a lot of times when we think of creating videos, we just focus on the creativity side of it and the actual technical, how do I edit this? How do I put this together? But hearing about the organization and spreadsheets and times of when you have to be placed, that's a huge part of filmmaking. It's like your shot sheets, it's your rundowns, so that's amazing. And I want to get to a question that we have in the chat that relates to that pre-production kind of thing. So the question is, as we all know, coaches want their players to stay focused, and sometimes there's limitations to access what you can capture in the locker room. How do you handle that? And it sounds like you kind of alluded to it before, that some of that comes with experience and time, but in general, what is your strategy when you when you're in and trying to capture access?
I can take a stab at this one. Personally, I try to operate as often as I can from a stay out of the way standpoint. That's sort of a personality quirk, but then also,
Sure.
Sort of strategic as well. As you don't want to be, to use a former coworker's approach, at TMZ. You don't want to be in their face. You want to be part of what is going on. So figuring out ways to not like you're spying on things, but like we were able to meet with Coach before the season, said we'd love to be able to record like one main team meeting a week. We've not been able to do that before. A lot of teams are able to do that. People have seen like Hard Knocks and things like that. It can happen. And it just so happens that he like if we could figure out a way to do it without us being in the room, like he was good with it. So that gave us enough inspiration to figure out how to get access to some built-in cameras in the auditorium that you see in the show, to figure out how to get access to those, control those even, and record them without ever being in the room. So like again, like he's trusting us that we're not just like doing that for every single meeting. We're only doing it for the meeting that we said. And part of it too is just coach's personality and willingness and understanding of what we're doing. We're not there to, we're not there to expose any game plans or secrets or anything like that. We're, especially us doing this piece after the season, we're going to use pieces that frame our team in a good light. Like if coach says, Justin, we're going to throw the ball to you 20 times this game, and then we throw the ball to him 20 times, we can, that's an awesome story, and fans are going to love that. We're not going to set him up to look like they don't know what they're doing, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah, that's huge. And I love being able to have, cameras in different places and locations. And it leads me to another question from the chat. And by the way, keep those questions coming. They're awesome. But a question from Phil is, typically how many shooters do you have on a game day, and are all of them on staff full time? So Ryan or Alex, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure, yeah. So it kind of depends on the game. I would say obviously us three are both shooting. So like I said, I shoot highlights. Ryan does bench sound. Nate will shoot what we call color, so kind of like auxiliary shots from the field perspective that kind of just help tell the story. And then we'll also have a player mic'd up, so a top shooter that's kind of locked down, not moving obviously, and then a ground shooter for the mic'd player that's more nimble and can, bounce around the whole field. Some games will have another color shooter that's up in the like fan perspective that's kind of just roaming the stadium. But so how many shooters was that? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 for like what we do essentially, or I guess for cameras that we're going to use for Voyage typically. Like cameras that we'll make sure we sift through before we start editing a full episode. Yeah, did I miss anything there, Ryan?
Sometimes we have 2 players mic'd up in a game, so sometimes it's 7 or 8. But as far as working on Voyage, it's us. We're the ones focused on that. We can kind of like set people up to, like say Adam Thielen scored his 50th touchdown when we had him mic'd up against Detroit. Now we weren't on those mic'd up cameras, but we can say like, hey, this is the big storyline, and they get it. They're part of the team. And I would say 3/4 of our shooters will be full-time people, and then maybe 2 will be an associate or a full-time seasonal that we have on like a temporary basis. But they all work for us, and they're not just game day freelancers.
That's awesome. And I think now we can kind of shift to the actual like creation of the Voyage. You mentioned that it's you 3 kind of actually owning the post-production side of it. But one of the questions from Jack is, and you already answered, like how many people typically work on Voyage, but he also asked, how do you divide all of the responsibilities for such a long form show? And about how long of a timeline do you have to complete the show? And you mentioned before that the way you guys delivered it and the timing in which you delivered it changed this year, but would love to get some insight into those questions there.
For sure. So yeah, the first episode specifically, since that's the one we sent to you guys, that was probably the longest that we worked on it. Obviously, it was our first episode, so yeah, let's take our time. Make it perfect. And then of course, like once we're releasing more, we get backed up and we kind of have to like rush to get things done. But the first episode is pretty much divided into sections of the episode. So I think in the beginning, the montage, I think I took care of that early on. And then I think Ryan did a lot of the training camp section. And then I want to say night practice, which was kind of like this other event that we put a bunch of resources into covering and told the story there. That was a section. So it was just pretty much like chapters almost as how we did the first episode. And then the last part, I believe I did a lot of the Green Bay game that's featured in that. So I guess, yeah, it was more of a chapter-based collaboration. And then I think probably once we all had those chapters completed, it was more of like mash it together. Doesn't matter how like uneven it feels, just throw everything together, and then we'll figure out how to like transition into everybody's part, and everybody can, you know, voice their opinion on each chapter, I guess if you want to call it. That's how we did the first episode and most of the episodes. So yeah, that's a beautiful picture of our our timeline that's super organized. We literally just mashed everything together, and it surprisingly wasn't. It felt better than I thought it would doing it for the first time. I was like, this is not gonna end well. This is not gonna be great. But you know, we know what the finished product, like we all aspired for what the Voyage to be. Kind of had all an idea in our head. So it was closer than I thought it would have been in the beginning. But I don't know if you guys want to add on to anything with that.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in here real quick that for the audience, you could send a reaction. So I'd love to see those reactions, what you think of this timeline, because it's beautiful to me. But I think, you know, being able to visually view the piece the way that, you know, creatives do on the timeline, this is amazing. But I'll throw to you guys.
Yeah, I would add, you know, how Alex was saying we did it in chapters. The phrase that's been in my mind a lot recently is, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. You know, this was very much all right, what am I doing today? All right, I'm doing Ride Along with Patrick Peterson. I can handle that. It's not, I'm doing the first 2 minutes of a 45-minute show. It's, I'm just doing a section. Can I just get the bare bones of that made? All right. And then I can give it to somebody else and they can look at it with a critical eye, or I can come back to it a couple days later and go back at it. It was a lot of that, of just starting, just getting something on a timeline and getting something laid out, and then like trying to figure out how those pieces could fit together.
That's awesome. And I think what's unique about how you all execute this is a lot of you guys are capturing the footage. So you also have that intimate connection with the footage in a way that helps the edit. On the same note of, you know, thinking in chapters, I'm curious for each of you, and any of you can answer, do you typically, I like to say, add a lot of fat to the segments and then cut down each one? What is your general take on working within those moments?
Yeah, I think that was always the approach, is just throw everything that we captured, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever it was. That, especially, I think the emphasis was more on like, okay, what was the cool access that we got? The first episode specifically, Nate, I don't know if you remember this, but you filmed like a kind of run and gun, like super quick interview with our head coach's wife up in the suite, you know, getting her thoughts. Like that was like, okay, we're going to throw this in there. I don't know if we're going to use it, but that was something unique that we got. So we're definitely going to, you know, put it on the plate, if you will, to kind of just see how it can fit. But yeah, we're always going long and then cutting from there for sure. Oh, look at this.
This view right here is something we use, especially during the season. It's basically impossible to read any of that, but what it allowed us to do is visually, we have a wall that's a whiteboard, which is pretty sweet. But it allowed us to map out the big moments, big storylines of each game. And so we could like visually just like sit there. Like there was a lot of times where we're just like sitting there like in silence, just staring at it. So we know that like, yeah, we could feature Justin Jefferson, who's one of the better players in the league. We could feature him every single game, but you know, maybe we pick a few games where he had like really excellent games, and we know where we can focus on some of the other players for different games. So this really allowed us to also plan out where we wanted to throw in any off the field storylines, and map that all out as well. So Ryan, would you add anything to that?
Only thing I'd add is just that, you know, I don't know if anybody can discern anything from this other than gibberish, but it is, we do have some run times kind of on the bottom under the calendar. And that was just like, if we finish a section, you know, write that down. Like, how close are we? Are we going to be long? Are we going to be short? Like, do we need to make something, you know, do we need to make the Indianapolis game 12 minutes, or does it really need to be 10 in order to fit this episode? So it was good to keep a running tally as we were actually editing to kind of go back to and be like, okay, here's what we got. And then, yeah, to have storylines to, you know, have marked down and, you know, be able to go back to of if, you know, hey, you know, this touchdown play, we just don't have much for it. Like, do we have anything else from this game that we can use? Like, yeah, there's X or Z. So it was really helpful to start with this.
That's awesome. And is a question from the chat that's sort of related from Dennis. Is there a fixed runtime for each Voyage episode? Is it a hard stop? What does that look like?
Yeah, I can take that one. That's actually one of the things that I mentioned. We did it a little bit differently this year than in the past. In the past, what we did with Voyage, it was like a bi-weekly or every other week show during the season. That a lot of teams approach, you know, their shows, similar shows in that way, or similar ways. And it worked all right, but it made us sometimes focus on or make a big deal out of storylines that in the scope of the season didn't really end up being that big of a deal, just for the sake of making intriguing stuff during the season. So one of the big changes is we pushed this to following the season, so we would have the full scope of the year to really emphasize what were actually the biggest storylines of the season. So that turned out to be a great thing. Another benefit of pushing it for after the season, it allowed us to actually partner with our local TV affiliate. We're affiliated with our Fox channel here in the Twin Cities, and they were willing to air this on their like main channel. So what we ended up doing is 4 episodes, and they gave us like, it was really kind of up to us if we wanted. We could do like a half-hour episode, which really ends up being like 22, just over 22-ish minutes of content, or an hour window, which would be like 40-some minutes of content. And you know, in the past, it was just a digital program, so it could be as long or short as we needed to, which was nice to have that flexibility. But in a project this big, having the target time actually helped us quite a bit, and it helped us like trim things it helped us make it more succinct, knowing that we had to fit a certain time. So I would say having a bigger project like this really helped us narrow things down when we were trying to tell the whole scope of the season. And I would like to think it made it, you know, a little bit better. Karina, you used the term trimming the fat a little bit. It gave us no option other than to do that. So that was one of the benefits of pushing it to after the season this year. So if any of you are involved in similar programs and have that option, there are some benefits there. Like in the NFL, teams themselves crank out so much content during the week. NFL Network cranks out so much content. Like there's a lot there. So we've found that, like, you know, if it can stay relevant, or if you can make it relevant after the season is over, you know, there's benefits there too. There's more eyeballs there.